Some men quit fighting because they grow old. Others, because the fight takes something they can never get back. Elias Crane was the latter kind. He used to wear a gun for the Union. A sharpshooter, they said he could drop a man from half a mile if he felt the need. But by the end of the war, his hands shook every time he pulled the trigger. Not from fear, from memory. When he came home to Arizona Territory, he swore before God and dust, "I'll never kill again." He bought a patch of land just outside a forgotten town called Red Mesa. Built a cabin with his own hands. And next to him always was a golden Mustang named Grace. Grace was more than a horse. She was the one thing that hadn't left him. When the nightmares came, she'd nudge his shoulder till he woke. When he plowed the fields, she'd pull steady, never complaining. In a life gone quiet, she was his heartbeat. That fall, the drought came early. The wells dried up, cattle dropped, and men got mean. One afternoon, a group of riders came through Red Mesa. Black coats, gray hats rustlers from the south side, led by a man named Cole Maddox. They drank heavy, spat on the floorboards, and took what they pleased. Elias didn't bother them. Not anymore. He'd turned the other cheek too many times to know what pride cost. But trouble has a way of coming whether you call for it or not. That night, he was at the edge of town selling some oats to the local stable hand when he heard Grace's scream. A sound he'd never heard from her before. He ran out into the street, and under the lantern glow, he saw them, Maddox and his men, laughing, drunk, using his horse as a target for their lasso game. One of them struck her flank with a whip. She reared up, terrified. Elias shouted, "Stop! That's my horse." Maddox turned, grinning through the smoke. "Well, preacher man," he sneered, "if she's yours, come take her." Elias walked forward slow, hands raised, eyes steady. "Please," he said quietly. "She's all I got." Maddox smirked. "That so?" He flicked his cigar. And before Elias could move, one of the men drew his pistol and fired. Grace fell where she stood. The echo of the shot rolled through the canyon like thunder from heaven. Elias dropped to his knees beside her, his trembling hands touching her mane. Her breathing slowed, her eyes met his once and went still. He didn't cry, not that night, not ever again. He just sat there while the men rode off laughing into the dark. When dawn came, he buried Grace beneath the old sycamore by the creek. And when the last shovel of dirt fell, he took the Bible from his saddlebag, the one his late wife Clara had given him, and laid it on her grave. He looked down at it for a long while. Then he whispered, "Forgive me, Lord." He left the Bible there. And when he turned back toward town, he carried a gun again. They'd taken the last good thing from Elias Crane. Now the man who swore never to kill was riding to remember how. This is just the beginning of Elias Crane's story. If you want to see what happens next in part 2, where the blood meets the dust, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. By the next morning, word had spread through Red Mesa. "Elias Crane's ridden again," they whispered. The preacher with the rifle's gone looking for sin. No one dared follow him. No one wanted to. He rode into the vast, empty desert with fire in his gut and ghosts in his head, a solitary figure against the endless expanse. The sun burned high in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of copper and bone. He followed their trail relentlessly, the careless boot prints, the discarded cigar ash, and the faint, lingering stench of whiskey on the wind. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the land, he finally found their camp near a dry riverbed. 4 men. Their harsh laughter echoed through the canyon, a cruel sound, like hyenas circling a carcass. From the safety of a high ridge, he watched them. One of them, the youngest, whittled a piece of wood with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The others mocked him for his nervousness. Maddox, their leader, sat apart from the group, cleaning his revolver with a calm, predatory stillness as cool as a snake coiled in the shade. Elias whispered a prayer under his breath, the words catching in his throat. "Vengeance belongs to the Lord." He paused, his grip tightening on his rifle. Then, with a voice as cold as the coming night, he added, "But the Lord's busy tonight." The first shot shattered the evening stillness, a crack of thunder out of nowhere. It was a clean strike. The young one dropped before his whittling knife even hit the ground. Chaos erupted. The others dove for cover, scrambling for their own rifles, their shouts echoing his name. "Crane, you crazy bastard!" He fired again. Another man fell, screaming as he collapsed into the dust. When the echo finally died away, only Maddox and one of his men remained. Maddox's voice cut through the silence, taunting. Come on down, preacher. Let's have a little talk about what's right and wrong. Elias stepped out from the shadows and into the flickering firelight. His eyes were hollow, his face a mask of grim determination. His coat flapped in the hot, dry wind. I ain't come to talk. The last man fell before he could even raise his weapon. Now, only Maddox stood. His grin was still sharp, his voice as smooth as oil. You always were half ghost, Crane, Maddox said, his tone conversational. I figured you'd come for me. Thing is, you're too late. With a flick of his wrist, he threw something small and metallic into the dirt at Elias's feet. It was a small silver locket, one Elias hadn't seen in 10 long years. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he picked it up. He opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a tiny picture of a woman, his wife, Clara, and next to it, a lock of her hair. Elias's voice was barely a whisper, quiet and shaking. Where'd you get this? Maddox laughed, a low, cruel sound that sent a chill down Elias's spine. Didn't you ever wonder, preacher, how your ranch just happened to burn down the very night she died? That wasn't some tragic accident. That was me. The desert wind howled around them, carrying the weight of his confession. Elias raised his rifle, the barrel aimed squarely at Maddox's heart. But Maddox didn't flinch. He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with a dark, triumphant light. I gave you mercy that night, Crane. I should have finished the job. Elias's finger trembled on the trigger. He could almost see her face in the flames, Clara, smiling under that same sycamore tree where he had buried their horse. Grace. Her voice echoed in his memory, a gentle warning from a lifetime ago. Eli. When the day comes that you must choose between hate and love, remember who you are. He took a deep, shuddering breath and slowly lowered the gun. I ain't you, Maddox. Maddox's grin widened into a sneer. Then I'll be happy to die knowing you're still a coward. He drew his gun, a blur of motion faster than thought. Elias reacted on pure instinct. 2 gunshots rang out, their echoes rolling through the silent canyon. The world seemed to hold its breath. Maddox stumbled backward, clutching his chest, and fell into the firelight. His eyes were wide, his mouth open as if he still had one last taunt to deliver. Elias dropped to one knee, his hand pressed tightly to his own side, where blood was already soaking through his shirt. He looked from Maddox's still body to the locket clutched in his palm. He whispered to the empty desert, Forgive me, Clara. I broke my promise. As the campfire crackled and died, the wind shifted, carrying the faint, clean scent of approaching rain. He painfully pulled himself up and turned his horse toward the dark horizon, wounded but breathing. Behind him, smoke rose into the deep red sky, a funeral pyre for the men who had forgotten mercy. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, hitting the dry, thirsty dust, Elias said quietly to himself, This ain't over yet. For some men, vengeance isn't the end of the road. It's only the beginning of the reckoning. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see what happens next. By dawn, the storm had broken wide over the plains. Rain fell heavy, washing blood from the dust, as if heaven itself tried to cleanse what men had done beneath it. Elias Crane rode slow, one hand pressed against his bleeding side. His horse limped, but carried him faithful as ever. He whispered, Just a little further, girl. We're almost home. He didn't know where home was anymore. The ranch had burned, the church lay empty, and every face he'd loved lived only in memory. Still, he rode east, toward the mountain ridge, where the land curved down into the valley of White Hollow. He hadn't been there in years, not since the fire. That's where he meant to rest, with Clara, with Grace, with the man he used to be. The rain intensified. He dismounted near the old homestead. The house was half ash and ruined, but the well still stood, and beside it the sycamore, the one Clara loved. He tied his horse to the rail and sank to his knees in the mud. Rain soaked his hat, his coat, his soul. He took out the locket Maddox had thrown, opened it once more. Her smile met him like a ghost of summer. He whispered, I did what I swore I wouldn't, Clara. I killed again. But I swear it was for something that mattered. A sound behind him. Soft, careful footsteps crunching through the wet dirt. He turned, hand trembling near his revolver. A figure stood there, small, cloaked, carrying a lantern that glowed against the rain. Don't move, he warned, his voice low and broken. The lantern lifted, and in that trembling light, he saw her face. Not Clara, but someone with her eyes. Younger, softer, and the way she looked at him like she'd known him all her life. Elias Crane, she said, her voice quivering. My name's Mary, Mary Boone. He frowned. Boone? She nodded. My mother. She worked for the Cranes years ago. Said if I ever got lost, I should find you. He stared, rain dripping down his face, not sure if he was dreaming. Then she held something out, a folded piece of paper, weathered by time. She said this was for you. Said you'd understand when the time came. He took it. Opened it. Inside, written in Clara's careful hand, were the words. If you find this, it means Grace still lives. Not our daughter, but the grace God gives a broken soul. Don't lay down your heart in vengeance, Eli. Bring it home. His chest tightened. Tears mixed with the rain as he whispered, Clara, you knew I'd fall. Mary watched him quietly. Your wife saved my mother once, she said. When my pa drank himself near to death, she fed us. Told us kindness can outlast pain if you let it. Elias looked up, his voice shaking. She said that? Mary nodded. She said you'd forgotten it for a while, but that you'd remember when it mattered. Elias rose slowly, wincing from the wound. He looked out over the valley, the rain easing into mist, sunlight bleeding through the clouds. For the first time in years, he didn't see the world through hate. He looked back at Mary, the child of mercy his wife had once saved. He took a deep breath, and for the first time since that fire, he smiled. He said, Your ma said kindness outlasts pain. Maybe she was right. Mary stepped forward. You're hurt. You should rest. He chuckled weakly. Maybe I will. She helped him to the porch, the broken planks creaking beneath their weight. They sat together as the clouds parted, watching the last of the storm drift toward the horizon. Elias reached down, patted his horse gently. Good girl, he whispered. She got us through, Mary smiled. She's beautiful. Yeah, Elias said, she's all I got left. And maybe that's enough. As the sun rose over the valley, Elias laid the rifle across his knees and said the words he'd once preached to others, but never believed for himself. Forgiveness ain't forgetting what was done. It's choosing not to die there with it. Mary watched him, quiet. What'll you do now? He looked at the sky, the light breaking open like grace itself. I'll start again, he said softly. Maybe rebuild this place. Teach some kid how to ride, plant a little garden, and try to live like Clara wanted. He looked out at the land, wet, shining, alive again. And with a faint smile, he whispered, The storm's over. Clara, I'm coming home, just not the way I thought. Some men ride into storms to find revenge, but the lucky ones, they come out the other side and find redemption instead. Elias Crane was a man who once carried a badge, and a burden he could never lay down. Years ago, in a town no one remembers, his gun took a man who didn't deserve to die. Since then, he'd made a promise to God, to his wife Clara, and to the memory of that night that he'd never kill again. He left the towns behind, traded his revolver for a plow, and built a quiet life on the edge of the plains. It was just him, his wife, and his horse Mercy, the only creature that had stayed through it all. But peace is a fragile thing in the West, and it never lasts long. One night, a band of outlaws rode through, looking for food, drink, and trouble. Elias gave them both. They left with his horse, and set fire to his barn before they rode off laughing. When Elias found Mercy the next morning shot, bleeding, half buried in the ash, something inside him broke. He knelt beside her, his hand trembling on her mane, and whispered, I promised her, Mercy. I promised I'd never pick up a gun again, but promises mean little when love turns to loss. That evening, he dug up his old revolver, wrapped in oilcloth beneath the porch. The iron felt cold like shaking hands with the man he used to be. He rode out into the coming storm. Each flash of lightning lit the road like judgment itself. The trail led him to a saloon in Deadwood Hollow, a place where men drank to forget who they were. He walked through the door dripping wet, his coat heavy, his eyes darker than the clouds outside. Where's Maddox? He asked the outlaw who'd led the raid. No one answered. He drew the gun slow, not to threaten, just to remind them what silence cost. From the corner, Maddox rose, smiling through whiskey. Well, if it ain't the preacher who quit preaching, he sneered. You come for your horse, Crane? Elias' voice was soft. I came for peace. You took the only thing that ever gave me any. The outlaw laughed, then tossed something across the table, a small, broken horseshoe. Then you'll have to settle for memories. When the smoke cleared, Maddox was on the floor, and Elias stood there, eyes hollow, chest rising slow. He holstered his gun and stepped outside. The storm had broken open now, rain washing blood and dust alike into the dirt. He didn't look back. He just rode, not knowing where, only that he couldn't go home again. By dawn, he reached the valley of White Hollow, his old ranch, long burned, half reclaimed by grass. He tied his new horse to the rail and sank to his knees beneath the old sycamore. He whispered, "Clara, I failed you again. I killed when I swore I wouldn't, but I couldn't let them hurt her. She was all I had left." Then, a voice behind him. "Elias Crane?" He turned, startled, hand near the gun. A young woman stood there, holding a lantern. "My name's Mary Boone," she said softly. "My mother worked for your wife years ago. She said if I ever got lost, I should find you." She held out a folded letter. "It's from her. From Clara." Elias opened it slowly, the ink faded but the words clear. "If you find this, it means Grace still lives, not our daughter, but the grace God gives a broken soul. Don't lay down your heart in vengeance, Eli. Bring it home." He closed the note, looked up at the girl, and said, "Your ma. She knew my wife?" Mary nodded. "She said your wife once saved us. Told her kindness outlasts pain if you let it." Elias looked to the sky, the clouds breaking, sunlight spilling over the valley. He holstered his gun one last time and whispered, "Maybe. It's time I believed that." He helped the girl onto the porch. Together, they watched the sunrise melt the rain away. He took one last look at his horse, the saddle empty beside him, and said, "The storm's over, Mercy. I'm home now." In the Wild West, some men rode into storms for vengeance. But the lucky ones, they came out the other side and found redemption instead. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more. Some men hang up their guns because they grow old. Others because they've taken one life too many. Elias Crane was the latter kind. Once a sharpshooter for the Union, his hands were steady, his eyes were dead, and his name was a whisper across the plains. But when the war ended, so did the man he used to be. He came home to nothing but ghosts. His wife Clara gone to fever. The land dry and cracked. So he built a new life out here in Red Mesa, just him and his horse Mercy. Mercy wasn't just a horse. She was the last bit of kindness he had left. She waited through every storm, and when he prayed, she stood still beside him like she understood. Elias made a promise before God in her grave. He'd never kill again. But the West has a cruel way of testing a man's faith. One night, outlaws rode in, drunk, loud, and mean, led by a name that still carried the smell of gunpowder, Cole Maddox. They came for whiskey. They left with Mercy. When Elias found her the next morning, bloodied, half buried in ash from his burned barn, he dropped to his knees. Rain fell. The world went silent. He pressed his forehead to her mane and whispered, "I promised her I'd never pick it up again." But then he saw the rope burns around her neck. And he realized some promises were made to be broken. Elias dug under the porch and pulled out the old Colt wrapped in oilcloth. His reflection in the barrel was a stranger. He holstered it slow. And when lightning split the sky, he rode out, a shadow on a dying trail. The trail ended at Deadwood Hollow, a saloon full of smoke, whiskey, and men who'd sold their souls long ago. Elias pushed open the doors. His boots were heavy, his hat dripping. The room went quiet. He said, calm as confession, "Where's Maddox?" No one moved, no one breathed. Then from the back, Maddox stood, grinning. "Well, look what the rain washed in," he laughed. "The preacher man who forgot how to pray." Elias' voice didn't rise. "I came for what you took." Maddox flicked a coin across the table, a broken horseshoe tied to it. "You mean that horse?" Maddox hit the floor, and Elias Crane holstered his weapon, his eyes as hollow as the grave. He rode all night through the downpour until dawn broke over the valley. His old ranch stood there, half burned, half forgotten. Like him, he tied his horse and knelt beneath the sycamore tree, the same place he'd once buried Clara. "Lord," he whispered, "I took another life. Maybe I ain't worth forgiving." A voice came from behind him. "Elias Crane?" He turned. A young woman stood there, soaked to the bone, holding a lantern and a letter. "My mother worked for your wife. She told me if I ever got lost, I should find you." She handed him the letter. The paper was worn, the ink fading, but the words were still clear. If you find this, it means grace still lives. Not the kind we bury, but the kind we're given, even after blood and dust. Don't lose your heart to vengeance, Eli. Bring it home. Elias closed the note and looked at the girl. Your ma. She knew Clara? She said your wife once saved her life. Elias looked out across the valley. The rain was easing and light was spilling through the clouds. He holstered the gun for the last time. Then maybe, he said, it's time I saved someone too. They walked to the porch together. The land smelled of rain and rebirth. Elias looked toward the empty saddle and whispered, the storm's over. Mercy, I'm home now. In the Wild West, a man's promise was his soul. And sometimes it took losing everything to find it again. Some men hang up their guns because they grow old, others because they've taken one life too many. Elias Crane was that kind, a Union sharpshooter once, quick hands, steady aim. But when the war ended, the man he'd been died too. He built himself a quiet life on the edge of Red Mesa. Just him and his horse, Mercy. Mercy wasn't just a horse. She was the last piece of kindness he had left. Through storms and silence, she stood by him. He made a promise before God, and before her, he'd never kill again. No matter what came, but the West, it don't care much for promises. One night, a band of outlaws rode through. Drunk, mean, led by a name men spat when they cursed. Cole Maddox. They wanted whiskey, they wanted fun, they took Mercy. And burned his barn to the ground. When Elias found her the next morning, bleeding, broken, breath fading, the world went still. He whispered, I promised her, Lord. I promised. Then the light left her eyes. That evening, Elias went to the porch, dug beneath the floorboards, pulled out the Colt wrapped in oilcloth. He hadn't touched it in 10 years. The steel was cold, like shaking hands with the man he used to be. He saddled up and rode into the storm. Lightning cut across the sky, each flash brighter than his guilt. He found them in Deadwood Hollow, a saloon full of men who'd forgotten Mercy. Elias pushed open the doors, boots heavy, hat dripping. The room went quiet. Where's Maddox? A man laughed. From the corner, Maddox rose, whiskey in hand. Well, look what the rain washed in. The preacher man who forgot how to pray. Elias spoke soft, steady. I came for what you took. Maddox tossed a small broken horseshoe across the table. You mean that horse? When the smoke cleared, Maddox lay still. Elias holstered his gun and walked into the rain. The world had gone quiet again, but not peaceful. He rode all night. By dawn, he reached the burned remains of his ranch, tied his horse to the rail, knelt beneath the sycamore tree where Clara was buried. Lord, he whispered, I failed you again. Behind him, a voice. Elias Crane? A young woman stood there, holding a lantern. My mother worked for your wife. She told me, if I ever got lost, find you. She handed him a letter. The ink faded, but the words clear. If you find this, it means grace still lives, not what we bury, but what we're given. Don't lose your heart to vengeance, Eli. Bring it home. He folded the letter, looked up at the sunrise, and whispered, maybe it's time I did. He helped the girl onto the porch. The storm was gone. Light spilled across the valley. Elias looked toward the empty saddle and said softly, the storm's over, Mercy. I'm home now. In the Wild West, a man's promise was his soul. And sometimes to keep it, he had to break it first. Some men hang up their guns because they grow old, others because they've taken one life too many. Elias Crane was that kind, a Union sharpshooter, once quick hands, steady aim. But when the war ended, the man he'd been died too. Now all he had was his horse, Mercy, and a promise he made before God and grave alike, he'd never kill again. But the West don't keep peace for long. They came drunk on cruelty and left ashes behind. That morning, the world went quiet, and the man who'd buried his rage dug it up again. He hadn't touched that gun in 10 years. The steel was cold like shaking hands with sin. He rode into the storm, and the storm rode with him. Deadwood Hollow, a town that chewed up good men and spat out bones. When the thunder faded, so did his promise. He'd found justice, but lost his soul again in the doing. The ink had faded, but the words still bled truth. If you find this, Eli, it means grace still lives. Don't lose your heart to vengeance. Bring it home. He'd spent 10 years trying to outrun his past. But redemption doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from coming home. The storm's over, girl, I'm home now. In the Wild West, a man's promise was his soul, and sometimes, to keep it, he had to break it first.